Hi guys, welcome back to K-Drama Addict.
The Incheon International Airport was always loud. It hummed with the energy of thousands of lives passing through. Businessmen dragging rolling luggage, families reuniting with tearful embraces, tourists clutching maps with wide, overwhelmed eyes. But on a Tuesday morning in late spring, when the cherry blossoms had just begun to give way to the full green warmth of early summer, one arrival stood out among the rest. Amara Collins stepped through the arrival gates with a single large suitcase, a carry-on bag slung over one shoulder, and a look on her face that was equal parts excitement and quiet terror. She was 25 years old, originally from Huntsville, Alabama, where the summers were thick and slow and the sweet tea was always cold. She had grown up on her grandmother's porch, listening to old gospel records and dreaming of places far away. Now here she was, Seoul, South Korea, and the dream had the audacity to be real. She wore a simple yellow sundress that fell just below her knees, the fabric soft and light against her brown skin. Her hair, her glorious, full, natural curly hair, was pulled up loosely at the crown of her head, with thick coils escaping around her temples and the nape of her neck. People stared. Some smiled. Amara was used to both. She had been awarded a one-year cultural exchange fellowship at the Seoul Arts and Literature Foundation, a prestigious program that placed international writers and artists within Korean creative institutions. Amara was a writer short stories, mostly, with a voice her professors back at the University of Alabama had described as quietly devastating. She wrote about home, about displacement, about the way love could feel like both a rescue and a trap at the same time. Her work had caught the attention of the Foundation's International Committee, and now here she was, yellow dress, curly hair, and all, stepping into a country whose language she barely spoke beyond Annyeonghaseyo and Gamsahamnida. She found her way to the taxi line, dragging her suitcase across the polished floor, and was fumbling with her phone, trying to pull up the address of her temporary apartment in Mapogu, when she collided, firmly and without warning, into a wall. Except the wall breathed. "Ow," said the wall in Korean, and then in clean, measured English. "Are you all right?" Amara stumbled back, grabbing her suitcase before it tipped over completely, and looked up. The man she had walked into was tall, taller than she had expected anyone to be, standing at least 6 feet, with a lean, composed build and a face that looked like it had been drawn carefully by someone who took their time. He was 30 years old, dressed in a charcoal gray button-down shirt tucked into dark trousers, with a leather bag over one shoulder and the slightly impatient look of someone who had a schedule and had not budgeted time for collisions. His name was Park Jun-ho. "I'm so sorry," Amara said immediately, pressing a hand to her forehead where it had knocked against his chin. "I wasn't looking where I was going. Are you okay?" He blinked at her, not rudely, more like he was recalibrating. "I'm fine," he said. His English was precise, practiced, with only a faint trace of an accent. "Are you new to Seoul? That obvious?" She laughed. A warm, open laugh that made the woman behind him in line glance over. "You were holding your phone like a map and walking like someone who doesn't know what direction they're going," he said. It wasn't unkind, just honest. "Wow, accurate." She tilted her head. "I'm looking for Mapogu. Do you know it?" "I live there," he said, and something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression, not quite surprise, more like the universe had made a small, unnecessary joke at his expense. "Which part?" She showed him the address on her phone. He studied it for a moment. "That's 2 streets from my building," he said. "Well," Amara said, smiling up at him, "looks like we're almost neighbors." Park Jun-ho was not the kind of man who smiled easily in public. He had been told this before by his mother, by his ex-girlfriend, by his colleague Seo-yun, who said he had the resting expression of someone perpetually reviewing a disappointing report. But something about the way this woman in the yellow dress said almost neighbors, like it was simply the most natural and wonderful coincidence in the world, made the corner of his mouth lift, just slightly. "I'll show you where to get a taxi," he said. That was how it began. Jun-ho was a senior editor at Hanul Publishing House, one of Seoul's most respected literary publishers. He had spent the last 8 years building a career on precision, finding the exact right words, the exact right stories, the exact right voices to put into the world. He was disciplined, focused, and deeply private. He had ended his last relationship 2 years ago, a quiet dissolution that had left no dramatic wreckage but had settled into a low, persistent loneliness he had learned to mistake for peace. Amara moved into her apartment on a Wednesday. By Thursday, she had already wandered into the wrong subway line twice, accidentally ordered a dish she was mildly allergic to, and stood in the middle of Hongdae looking completely, cheerfully lost. She wore a pale green dress that day, the same easy, simple style as the yellow one, her curls bouncing as she turned in a slow circle trying to match the street in front of her to the map on her phone. Junho found her like that, purely by accident, walking home from a meeting, and stopped on the pavement. "You again," he said. She spun around. Her face broke into a grin so immediate and genuine that it was almost startling. "Oh my God, you again. See, I told you, almost neighbors." He looked at the phone in her hand. "You're going the wrong way." "I know," she said, laughing. "But in my defense, all these streets look the same to me right now and I haven't had coffee yet." He hesitated. He had a manuscript waiting at home. 3 chapters he needed to review before morning. He was not, by nature, a man who detoured. "There's a good coffee place 2 blocks from here," he said. She looked at him, really looked at him with those warm, assessing eyes and said, "Are you offering to take me?" Another pause. "I suppose I am." They sat in a small cafe tucked between a convenience store and a flower shop, drinking Americanos while the evening settled softly over the city. Amara told him about Alabama, about the heat, about her grandmother's garden, about how she had always felt like she was writing toward something she couldn't name yet. Junho listened the way he did everything, carefully, completely, without interruption. "What do you do?" she asked him. "I'm a book editor." Her eyes went wide. "No. Yes. I'm a writer," she said, pointing at herself. "I'm here on a literary fellowship. We literally work in the same universe." She shook her head, laughing softly at the coincidence. "What kind of books do you edit?" "Literary fiction, mostly. Stories about people trying to understand themselves." "That's all stories," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose it is." By the time they finished their coffee, the street outside was lit with the warm glow of shop signs and the distant sound of music drifting from somewhere deeper in the neighborhood. Junho walked her back to her building. Her simple, practical apartment building with the red mailboxes out front, and they stood at the entrance in the particular silence of 2 people who have unexpectedly enjoyed each other's company and don't quite know what to do with that. "Thank you," Amara said, "for the coffee, and the directions, and for not letting me wander into the Han River or something." "The Han River is not that easy to wander into," he said. She grinned. "See you around, neighbor." He walked the 2 blocks home and stood in his apartment, tidy, spare, full of books, and thought about the way she laughed. Like nothing in the world was worth holding back for. He told himself it meant nothing. He did not entirely believe himself. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, Seoul began to reveal itself to Amara the way cities do when you stop being a tourist and start simply living. Slowly, in layers, the way you peel something beautiful and find more beauty underneath. She discovered the Pojangmaka tents near her neighborhood where the tteokbokki was spicy enough to make her eyes water, and the ajumas behind the carts laughed warmly when she fumbled through her order. She found a small bookstore in Mapogu with an English section in the back corner and a cat that slept on the poetry shelf. She wore her blue dress on Mondays, her white dress with the tiny flowers on Wednesdays, and her deep burgundy dress on Fridays, and she wrote every morning at a small desk by her window, watching the city wake up below her. She and Junho fell into an accidental rhythm. It started with small things. A text. He had saved her number the night of the coffee, claiming it was practical in case she got lost again. Asking if she had found the good samgyeopsal place on the corner yet. She hadn't, so he told her which table had the best ventilation. Then, on a rainy Thursday when she was stuck inside and restless, she texted him a line from something she was writing and asked if it felt true in translation. He replied 20 minutes later with 3 different ways to think about it, and they ended up in a 2-hour conversation about the nature of untranslatable words, Han, Nunchi, Jong, and whether emotion could survive the passage between languages. Ken, Amara wrote, "Feeling doesn't need a word. The word is just the door." Junho sat in his office and read that line twice. He started walking past the bookstore more often. She started leaving her window open when she wrote, so she could hear the street. They did not say any of this to each other directly, It was the kind of thing that lives in the space between people before either of them is brave enough to name it. The foundation had assigned Amara a workspace in a shared creative studio in Yongsan, where she was expected to spend 3 days a week among other artists and writers. It was there that she met Cha Min-seo, a Korean novelist her age, sharp-tongued and fiercely funny, who took one look at Amara and decided immediately that they would be best friends. Min-seo spoke English with aggressive confidence and zero hesitation, and she became Amara's guide to everything the guidebooks didn't cover. Which Norbang rooms had the best song selection, how to navigate the unspoken social choreography of group dinners, and, most helpfully, how to read Korean men. They don't say what they feel, Min-seo said one afternoon, spinning in her studio chair while Amara described, without naming names, a certain editor who texted her about food and literature and walked her home without being asked. They do what they feel. Watch what he does, not what he says. What if what he does is just be a nice person? Amara said. Min-seo looked at her flatly. Korean men are not randomly nice to women they don't care about. That's not how we're built. Amara thought about this for longer than she intended to. It was the Foundation's spring showcase, a cultural evening where the international fellows presented their work alongside Korean artists. That changed things properly. Amara read a short piece she had been working on since arriving in Seoul, a story about a woman who travels to a country where no one knows her name and discovers that anonymity is the closest thing she's ever felt to freedom. She stood at the microphone in her deep rose dress, her curls pinned up with a single clip, and read in her Alabama voice, slow and deliberate, and the room was very quiet in the particular way rooms get quiet when something true is being said out loud. Junho was in the audience. He had not told her he was coming. He had received the invitation through professional channels. Hanul Publishing was a sponsor of the Foundation, and he had almost not come, telling himself he was too busy, the manuscript was waiting, there were emails. But he had come. He had arrived 10 minutes early and sat in the third row and watched her walk to the microphone in her rose dress. And when she read, he felt something inside him shift, the way a key turns in a lock it was made for. Afterward, at the reception, he found her surrounded by people, glowing with the particular warmth of someone who has just been genuinely seen. She spotted him across the room and her face did the thing it always did. That immediate, uncalculated brightness, and she crossed to him. You came, she said. I was invited, he said. His voice was careful, the way it got when he was feeling too much. Did you like it? He looked at her for a moment. You wrote about feeling free because no one knows you, he said. Do you actually feel that way here? She considered the question seriously, the way she always did. Sometimes, she said, but less and less. The more people I meet who actually see me, she glanced at him briefly, the less I want to be invisible. The silence between them was the kind that hums. Can I tell you something? He said. Yes. I haven't read someone's work and felt that way in a long time. It was not a declaration of love. It was, for Junho, something more intimate, the opening of a door he kept very carefully closed. Amara understood this instinctively, and she didn't push it. She just smiled at him, warm and unhurried, and said, That means a lot, coming from you. They stayed at the reception until it was nearly empty, talking in the way they had started to talk. Easily, deeply, like two people who have known each other longer than the calendar says. He walked her home in the cool spring night, and at the door of her building, under the dim light of the entrance lamp, he looked at her curls falling loose around her shoulders and thought that he had never in his life wanted to say something so badly and found himself so completely without words. Junho, she said softly. Yes. Next time you want to come to something I'm doing, you can just tell me you want to come. He looked at her. I know, he said. Okay, she said, and went inside. He stood on the pavement for a moment longer than necessary before walking home. Summer arrived in Seoul the way it always does. Suddenly, completely, with a heat that pressed down on the city like a warm hand. The streets smelled like grilled corn and sunscreen, and the Han River banks were crowded on weekends with people laying out picnic mats and trailing their feet in the direction of the water. Amara wore her lightest dresses now, a pale lavender one that she loved, a soft white one with thin straps, a coral one that caught the light when she moved. She had settled fully into Seoul by now, the city no longer foreign but familiar, its rhythms absorbed into her daily life. She knew which convenience store had the best triangle kimbap, which subway car was least crowded in the morning, how to bow at exactly the right angle when greeting the senior staff at the foundation. She had also, slowly and somewhat helplessly, fallen into something with Junho that neither of them had named. They met for coffee twice a week now, sometimes 3 times. They texted every day. Long, wandering conversations that moved from literature to food to childhood memories to the specific philosophical problem of what a person owes the place they came from. He had started sharing manuscripts with her, not for professional feedback, just because he said he trusted her instincts. She had started writing a longer piece, something closer to a novel, and the protagonist had a quietness to him that she did not examine too closely. But there was something in the way Junho held himself. A reserve, a careful maintenance of distance even in closeness, that sometimes made Amara feel like she was standing outside a house with all the lights on, unable to find the door. She had learned, through Minasio's patient cultural translations, that he was not cold, that what looked like restraint was often depth, that Korean men of his type expressed care, through acts rather than declarations. And she saw the acts. The coffee he always remembered to order without asking, the way he walked on the outside of the pavement without thinking about it, the manuscript notes he left her that were always more generous than she deserved, the time he had spent an entire Saturday afternoon helping her navigate a government office for her fellowship paperwork without a single complaint. She saw all of it, and still the door. What Amara did not know, what Junho had not told her, was that there was a woman named Kim Eugene. Eugene had been Junho's girlfriend for 4 years, ending 2 years before Amara arrived. The breakup had been mutual in the technical sense. Both of them had acknowledged, quietly and without drama, that what they had was not enough, but it had not been painless. Eugene had wanted more than Junho knew how to give. She had left saying that loving him was like trying to fill a room that had no walls. He had replayed that line more times than he would admit. Eugene reappeared in July. She had been transferred back to Seoul from a work posting in Busan, and she texted Junho on a Wednesday evening. Politely, casually, the way you text someone you have loved and learned to be civilized about. I'm back in Seoul. Hope you're well. He replied with equal civility. They agreed to meet for lunch the following week, as adults, as people with shared history who had managed to remain on reasonable terms. Amara found out about the lunch not from Junho but from Minacio, who knew Eugene tangentially through a mutual friend and had heard the news through the particular speed of Seoul's interconnected social circles. Minacio told Amara over bingsu one afternoon, watching her face carefully as she did. Are you upset? Minacio asked. We're not together, Amara said. I have no right to be upset. That's not what I asked. Amara stirred the shaved ice slowly. Outside, the summer light was thick and golden. I don't know what we are, she said finally. And I've been letting that be okay because I don't know. I thought maybe the not naming was just how it was with him. With the way he is. The not naming is him being afraid, Minacio said with characteristic bluntness. Afraid of what? Of being that open with someone again. Eugene hurt him. Not because she was cruel. She wasn't. But because he let himself need her and then she told him he wasn't enough. Minacio paused. Or that's the version he believed. Amara was quiet for a long moment. Then, why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what you're walking into. Minacio looked at her steadily. And because I think you might be the first person since her that he actually wants to walk into something with. But he won't say it. So someone has to. That evening, Amara sat at her desk by the window for a long time without writing. The city moved below her, indifferent and lovely. She thought about what it meant to want something you weren't sure you were allowed to want. She thought about the door and the lights and the particular ache of almost. She put on her burgundy dress and walked to the bookstore 2 blocks over. Their bookstore now, she thought, without deciding to. And she was standing in the English section, not really reading anything, when the door opened and Junho walked in. He stopped when he saw her. I come here sometimes, he said, as if explaining himself. I know, she said. I do too. They stood among the books in the narrow aisle, close enough that she could see the slight tension in his jaw that meant he was working something out internally. The cat on the poetry shelf observed them with ancient disinterest. I heard Eugene is back, Amara said, quietly, not accusingly, just honestly. Something moved across his face. Yes. Are you? She paused. Is that something that's going to change things? He looked at her for a long moment. The bookstore was very quiet. No, he said. It isn't. Okay. she said. And then, because she had always been braver on paper than in person but was trying to close that gap, Junho, I need you to know something. What? She met his eyes. I'm not asking you for anything you're not ready to give, but I'm also not going to keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. I think you know what I mean. The silence that followed was the longest of her time in Seoul. Then Junho reached out and very gently tucked one of her escaped curls back from her face. The first time he had ever touched her, and the tenderness of it was so quiet and so complete that Amara felt it land somewhere deep in her chest. I know, he said. I know what you mean. Autumn came to Seoul with the particular beauty that the city seemed to have been designed for. The ginkgo trees turning gold along the boulevards, the air carrying the clean, bittersweet smell of fallen leaves. The city somehow more itself in October than at any other time of year. Amara wore her rust-orange dress on the first cool morning and stood at her window with her coffee and felt the particular satisfaction of a person who has landed, fully and finally, somewhere that fits. Things had changed since the bookstore. Not dramatically. There had been no grand confession scene, no cinematic rain, no swelling orchestral moment. What there had been was a quiet, incremental opening. Junho had texted her the morning after with a recommendation for a new Korean novel, and at the end of the message, almost like an afterthought, had written, I've been thinking about what you said. You were right to say it. That was all. But Amara, who had learned to read his language, the one that lived in what he did, not what he declared, understood exactly what it meant. They had dinner that Friday. A real dinner, at a restaurant he had chosen carefully and made a reservation for, which Min Seo, upon hearing this, described as basically a proposal by Junho standards. It was a small place in Itaewon that served a menu combining traditional Korean flavors with something more contemporary, the kind of place where the food was serious but the lighting was soft. Amara wore her deep rose dress, the one from the foundation showcase, and when Junho opened the restaurant door for her and she walked past him and he said, very quietly, You look beautiful. She felt something in her finally settle, like a word clicking into its definition. They talked for 3 hours. They talked about her novel, the longer piece she was building, which had grown into something about two people learning each other across the distance of all their differences. He asked her careful questions, the way he asked about everything, and she answered honestly, including the part she hadn't said aloud before. That it was, in part, about them. He didn't look away when she said that. He nodded slowly and said, I thought it might be. And then, it's the best thing you've written. In the weeks that followed, Seoul became a different city, or perhaps the same city seen through a different light. They walked through Bukshin Hanok village on a Sunday, the old tile rooftops arching against a pale sky, Amara stopping every few steps to photograph things. A door, a shadow, a pot of persimmons on a windowsill. Junho walked beside her with his hands in his pockets and his face doing the thing it did now, more often, that Min Seo had clocked immediately and reported back with visible satisfaction. He looks at you like he's reading his favorite book. There were hard moments too, because there always are. In late October, Amara received news from home. Her grandmother, the woman who had given her the porch and the gospel records and the first idea that the world was bigger than what she could see, had been hospitalized. It was serious but not immediately critical, and Amara spent a night sitting on her apartment floor with her phone, talking to her mother in Alabama, feeling the specific grief of being far away from the people you come from. Junho came over without being asked. He didn't say much. He brought doenjang jjigae from the jjigae place she loved, and he sat on her floor with her and let her talk. And when she ran out of words, he didn't try to fill the silence with comfort that would have sounded hollow. He just stayed. When she finally fell quiet, tired from the emotion of the evening, he said, She raised someone extraordinary. She knows that. Amara looked at him. That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. I mean everything I say, he said. I just don't always say everything I mean. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let her, and outside the Seoul night moved on with its indifferent, gorgeous momentum. Her grandmother recovered. Amara exhaled. November arrived. The fellowship was scheduled to end in February, and the question of what came next had begun to hover at the edges of everything, unasked but present. Amara wrote about it obliquely in her notebook. What does it mean to build something in a place you were only supposed to visit? What do you owe the life you left behind? And what do you owe the one you've found? She hadn't answered it yet. She brought it to Junho one evening, not as a question about them specifically but as a question about life, and he read it in her notebook and was quiet for a while. Then he said, "In Korean there's a concept, inyeon. It's the idea that the people you meet are connected to you by fate, by threads that have existed for lifetimes. Every encounter is part of that thread being pulled." He paused. "I've never been someone who believed in fate. I believe in work, in choices, in what you build deliberately." "But," she said, because she heard the but. "But since the airport," he said, "I've thought about Inyeon more than I ever have." Amara set her notebook down. "Junho. Yes. Say what you mean." He looked at her across the warm lamplight of his living room, surrounded by his books, his ordered, careful life, and for the first time in 2 years, possibly longer, he let himself say exactly what he meant, without editing, without the careful restraint he wore like a second skin. "I love you," he said. "I think I have for a long time, and I don't want February to be the end of this." The silence that followed was not awkward or loaded. It was the silence of something completed. Amara reached across the space between them and took his hand, her brown fingers threading through his, and she thought about Alabama, about her grandmother's porch, about the yellow dress she had worn in the airport, about every small and improbable step that had led her to this living room, this man, this moment. "I love you too," she said, "and I don't want it to be the end either." "Then it won't be," he said. It wasn't a grand plan. It was a beginning of a conversation, the kind that would take months and careful thought and phone calls with her mother in Alabama and probably more than a few difficult logistics. But in the way of all true things, the decision had already been made before either of them spoke it out loud. It had been made in an airport collision, in a coffee shop, in a bookstore aisle, on a foundation stage, on an apartment floor. It had been made in every text, every walk, every silence that held more meaning than most people's speeches. On the first real cold day of November, they walked along the Han River together. The water was gray-silver and wide, the city rising on both sides of it in the early evening light. Amara wore her burgundy dress with a long coat over it, her curls loose and full around her face, and Junho walked beside her with his hand in hers. And for once he was not in his head, not reviewing, not editing. Just there. "I'm going to finish the novel," she said. "I know. And I think it has a happy ending." He glanced at her sideways, and the corner of his mouth lifted. "I thought you didn't write happy endings." "I don't," she said, smiling up at him. "I write true ones." He squeezed her hand. Above them, Seoul spread wide and luminous and indifferent to the particular miracle of two people finding each other in the middle of it, as it always does, as all great cities do, carrying 10,000 love stories in their bones without pausing, without bowing, without needing to acknowledge what they hold. But Amara and Junho knew, and that, as it turned out, was entirely enough.
Hi guys, in this story we learned that real love is not always loud. Sometimes it is patient, gentle, consistent, and built through understanding. Kindly like and subscribe.